Welcome back to another episode of the Positive Persistence Podcast. I am your host, Ian Bowen, and you know how we do. We talk to people who are able to shed some light on how they persist with positivity in the world. And today I am super excited that we have Janessa Carlisle on the show. Janessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. So Janessa is a young woman that I met probably about 4 years-ish ago through her mother at the boot camp. And at that time, Janessa was at IU, the University of Indiana down in Bloomington. And since then, a lot has happened. And I'm excited to share with our viewers and listeners what Janessa's been up to and her story. So we're going to kind of hop into this, Janessa. And let me introduce you a little bit here. So Janessa Carlisle, as you guys see right here, she works as a Parks and Trails ambassador for the Regional Parks and Trails System in the Twin Cities metro area in Minnesota. Side note, for those of you who didn't know, that's where I grew up. I'm a Minnesota boy. So she is dedicated to creating representation outdoors and supporting programming that challenges structural and programmatic inequities across the region. Janessa is a trailblazer with a burning passion for leading the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Affinity Group, otherwise known as BIPOC Outdoors, with camping retreats that cultivate rest, play, and healing with her fellow community members. Through her hard work as a boat captain, trail guide, and dog musher in the Boundary Waters, for those who don't know, that is northern Minnesota, she finds immense importance in bridging the gap, the adventure gap, and defying negative stereotypes in the outdoors. So Janessa, again, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to unpack some of these bullet points because some of the things I've never heard of, and I am so interested in finding out more from you, especially about the negative stereotypes in the outdoors, the adventure gap, and all of those things. So let's just jump right in and kind of give our viewers and our listeners a little backstory of Janessa and what she's been doing the last 25 years of your life leading up to right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ian. I am a new native to Minnesota. I moved to St. Paul about a year ago, actually, and I absolutely love it here. But before that, I grew up, I'm from Northwest Indiana, and from Portage, Indiana, right in the Indiana National Dunes area.
Mm-hmm.
And there is where I found my real love for nature. Being right under Lake Michigan, I enjoyed going there with my family constantly. I would go there with my friends. I developed such a love for swimming. I've been a swimmer since I was 7, and I always call myself a little mermaid, and I absolutely loved it. And from there in college, I started off as pre-dental, and then my first summer, I was a camp counselor at my local YMCA, and I absolutely loved it. There was just something so special to me about being outside all day, every day with kids and watching them learn and grow and seeing myself learn and grow in the outdoors. And I felt so powerful just being able to play all day, every day. And I joked with my friends constantly where I was like, if I could be a camp counselor for the rest of my life, I would be. And at the time, I was taking a lot of chemistry and biology classes in school, and I was struggling really badly, and my heart wasn't in it. And I'm the kind of person where if my internal flame isn't lit, I'm like, on to the next. And so
Yeah.
I was working at my career center at college, and I met with a career coach that was like, "So pre-dental, really?" And he was like, "You really enjoy talking to people, and you want to be a dentist, like with your hands in their mouth the whole time?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's actually a really good point." And lo and behold, IU had one of the top programs in the nation for Parks and Rec, and so I switched my major, and I absolutely fell in love with it. That's where I was like, oh wow, I really can create a career of just being outside and playing, yet also encouraging others to play, and just encouraging the different types of joy that we experience outside as people and as communities. And so from there, I became a camp counselor at a camp in New Hampshire. and
Oh,
it was incredible. That really built my. I became a trail guide. I started leading the department for outdoor adventure there. So what that meant essentially is I was taking girls ages 6 to 14 on camping trips along the coast of New Hampshire and Maine, and that
wow.
experience was wild in the best way. I really there was so much trust given to me by that organization, and as a young person, but also as someone who was kind of building my identity in the outdoors, that was a space that I really got to learn what it meant to be uh, an outdoor trail guide and a mentor in the outdoors. And that's kind of where I started being like, okay, my passion is leaning into um, the outdoors is something that, as I talk about a lot, when people talk about what outdoorsy means, a lot of the times people think of conquering the outdoors, or it has to be some sort of huge challenge where you're like hiking mountains or you're rock climbing.
Hmm.
And in my work, I'm like, well, being outdoors can just mean you like being in your backyard, or that can mean that you just like going to your local park. And so a lot
Yeah.
of the girls at this camp absolutely despised being outside because they're I mean, me as a teenager too, as like a 13-year-old, I wasn't like, yes, let's go outside. And so I was like,
Right.
how can I kind of adjust what their interest and how they see themselves in the outdoors to like how can I make nature a place where they want to be essentially. And
Uh-huh.
so I got really creative with it. I At one point I was partnering with like other camp department heads. Like there was one of the department heads was into photography, and I was like, cool, how can we get more photography in my programs for the folks or for the girls that really just want to go outside and take pictures, or partnering with the art barn. And so I was kind of curating camping trips that everyone felt seen and understood and safe, yet perhaps challenged if they wanted to be in a supportive environment. And that's kind of where I
Just to be
really started
clear,
to
when you
build my
say
career.
camping trips, we're talking overnight camping trips,
Overnight,
right?
multi-day. Well, for the younger kids, yes. So for the 6, 7-year-olds, I would do one night, but the
Hmm.
14-year-olds were doing 4 night camping trips. And so this was in a lot of my trips were in the White Mountains up in New Hampshire, so it was like moose country. There was not a cell bar in sight. No one's got service. There's
Yeah.
vault toilets
Unplugged.
everywhere,
Right.
unplugged for sure. And convincing teenage girls that that's a space that is fun and like
Yeah.
I'm like convincing them to join the trips was it was a little tough at first, but I loved it. It was
Because
incredible.
this is considered rustic camping, right? Like you guys are
Yes.
hiking and you're pitching tents and you're bringing your food with you and
Yes.
maybe digging your own toilets and that kind
Yeah,
of deal.
exactly. Exactly. Yes, that kind of deal. There were some of the longer nights we got to stay at campgrounds that had running water, and that was really nice. But yeah, there were a lot of nights where we every time we were cooking our own food, and we were hiking together and staying in tents, and packing our vans with all the sleeping bags and gear. And it was
Yeah.
incredible. It was so transformative, especially for me, and a lot of the girls as well. And I realized I really loved helping others build their confidence in the outdoors as I was doing the same.
That is amazing. That sounds so similar to the experience that I had when I was about 8. I was at a camp in the International Falls area called Camp Kuchaching, and we would take overnight canoe trips. And we would be out in the Boundary Waters for 3 or 4 days, and we'd be canoeing miles during the day, and then we would get to land, but we wouldn't be stopping there. We would then be portaging everything. So all of our food, all of our gear, the canoes, going on a 1 mile hike to get to the other side of that landmass, and then putting the canoes back in, paddling again for a couple more hours, and then setting up camp. And, when I got back from that camp, I was a different person. It's like you said, like
Absolutely.
self confidence wise was off the chart compared to where I was before. And it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, and I love that. And truly, it really builds your leadership skills. It builds the way that you see yourself, like you said, the way you perceive yourself,
Yeah.
your strength. It becomes so much more mentally, emotionally, and physically. Those trips are tough. I can't imagine. And when you're doing it as a kid too, and I feel like that's when you really start to build close relationships with your mentors too, or your camp counselors, because that's when
Hmm.
teamwork really, really becomes necessary, right? So that's
Yeah,
awesome.
very cool. So this is where you were basically like a professional camper, and you took
Yes,
these kids out, and then you became a mentor for them, and you were actually able to connect with them, and on a certain level pull out their new identity, being that they're more self-reliant, the more independent, the more confident. And I would imagine after their experience, their self-esteem was through the roof compared to where it was before.
absolutely. I think being at camp is the camp that I worked at was a 7 week camp, so the girls were there the entire summer, and that's not an easy thing to do as a kid, right? Homesickness
Yeah,
becomes a thing, and
for real.
yeah, you're away from home. A lot of these girls were from or like big cities, and so
Hmm.
being out just even at camp in the woods was a whole new experience. But especially being like in a tent in a much more sometimes perceived as scary environment, it was a huge transformation because I got to build a lot of my team and I got to build really close relationships with these girls and kind of help them foster the sense of their identity in themselves in these outdoor spaces by just being like, you can do this, I'm here to support you, while also giving a lot of autonomy and a lot of individuality. I made sure that my team and I we weren't doing everything for them and giving the girls
Yeah,
the autonomy to be like, we'll show you, how to put these tents up and we'll show you how to cook these meals, but let's see how you like to do it and let's see like you put your, spin on things, and the girls
right.
loved that.
That is so cool. Yeah, that is probably a memory they will always have and never forget that experience.
Absolutely. Oh, it was a blast. That experience kind of led me to my other more weirder jobs that I took as well in the outdoors that kind of got me to where I'm at today.
Okay, let's unpack that. So your more weirder jobs.
Yep, yep.
Okay.
I took kind of an unconventional route. So post college, in 2022, I wasn't quite ready for a 9 to 5. I wanted to travel more. I wanted to play. I really wanted to build upon where I wanted to go because the outdoor field is huge, right? And I was like, what sector do I want to work in? What kind of recreation do I want to work in? And I also, there were a lot of things that scared me still about working in the outdoors. And my motto that year was, if it scares me, I want to do it. And so,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So that summer I graduated, I worked at camp, and then after that I moved home for a couple weeks and I was looking for jobs, and I was like, okay, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? And I remembered this canoe guide position that I used in a presentation once in Minnesota, and I looked them up to see if they were hiring, and they were hiring canoe guides, traveling canoe guides for across the US. And I was like, this sounds interesting. So I applied and I got the job. And a week later, I moved up to St. Paul, Minnesota for a week to train at this organization. And then after that, I hopped in a van with 7 strangers and we took 6 24-foot canoes on a rig on the back of our van, and we traveled across the Midwest and East Coast just taking people on canoe trips, and a lot of schools would come out for field trips and we'd take them on their local waterways, and it was amazing and also incredibly wild because it was so out of my comfort zone, but I absolutely loved it. And that
Wow.
kind of led me into another role after that too. But yeah,
That says a lot about your character because, going back to your motto for that summer was if it scares me, I want to do it. That is an incredible approach to fear because most people don't take that approach. When fear rears its ugly head, people usually go in the opposite direction. You stepped up to it and you're like, okay, if I feel that twinge, that means I need to push into it or lean into it. That's amazing. Commendable.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think leaning into discomfort has been the hardest yet most rewarding thing that I've ever done. And realizing that growth and transformation doesn't happen in comfortability is such a hard pill to swallow,
Yes.
but
Yes.
it has to be integrated into our lives, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you are 100% right that yes, we cannot grow unless we challenge ourselves. And when we do that, we are going to naturally step out of our comfort zone. And what I've learned is that the beautiful thing is that when you step out of your comfort zone grows.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
And then the more you do that, the more things you're able to accomplish, the more things you're able to understand and experience. And as you continue to push forward, your comfort zone will continue to grow as well. But the trick is not to get comfortable there, right? You have to get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable and continuing to push your comfort zone and those limits, because that's what's going to lead to you being able to tap into your potential and really live the life that you've always wanted to live, which, it sounds like you are on the path for sure, to do the things that you want to do. So let's get back to your story, because it sounded like you had multiple wild jobs. This is one of them.
Yes, yes. And
Okay.
this this one was interesting because I dabbled in canoeing. Like at camp, I would hop in a canoe here and there, just the little guy aluminum canoes, and paddle around the lake, come back, nothing too crazy. These were Voyager canoes, so they're 20 feet, 24 feet long, and there's about 10 to 11 people fit in them. And as the boat captain, I was sitting in the back of the canoe in the stern, and it was so wild just being in charge of a canoe most of the time, just with a bunch of kids, and learning how to stern and how to paddle. I was trained on the Mississippi River, and that was exciting and deeply scary. And I'm deeply comfortable with water. I've always had a sacred relationship with water, but I was
Hmm.
still every day like, is this thing gonna tip? Like, what happens if we all end up in
Right.
the river? And that was an experience for sure. But I had a lot of people there to catch me, and I had a lot of support from my colleagues and my coworkers and my co-guides, and the people in my boats. And there were so many times when there was one time we were in Passaic, New Jersey, and we had, usually on Wednesdays we do free community days where anyone could just come down for a free boat ride. And a lot of the time it was people's first time canoeing, and so that was a lovely experience to be that person, to be like, I've got you, let's talk about this. And that's kind of what I mean too by challenging folks in a safe and supportive environment. Is we'd be
Hmm.
like, this is really, this is really difficult, we're really proud of you, let's get you in this boat, like I'm here for you. But there was one day in Passaic where there was an older woman, and she was crossing a bridge that we were canoeing under, and she's like, what y'all doing? And I'm like, oh, like we have free community days, like come on down to the river bank. And she's like, let me go get my grandbabies. And her whole family came down, and it was all of their first time canoeing. And that moment, I was just like, yes, this is why I do what I do, because it was so incredible to just see the awe and the wonder in their eyes as they got to experience a waterway that they had been living on for a really long time, in the perspective of on it in a canoe, and an experience that it felt like a movie. It was amazing. It was incredible.
Yeah, so that's so cool. So I mean, it sounds like some of the work that you do, it helps people really find joy or enjoy the space that they live in a totally different way.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And that's why it brings me so much joy to talk about this, because that's why I do what I do, is because I'm like, I love that. And I'm excited to get into this further down the road too, with all of the kind of inequities and the negative stereotypes. But yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. I think it's so important for people to experience different places, different spaces, and activities that they had never been a part of before, because it really does open up so many doors and avenues for folks. And I mean that in like a literal way, but also in a way of like improving mental health and physical health and storytelling and gathering and play and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and just being able to connect with nature can be so rewarding, relaxing,
Yes.
therapeutic. Growing up in Minnesota, not far from where you are now, I was outside all the time. And living where I do now, not very far from where you grew up in Chesterton, Indiana, I'm able to enjoy being close to the lakeshore and the national park and the trails. And it's just, it's amazing to be able to get out there and experience like the true beauty of nature. And when you can
Yes.
connect with that, it is so freeing. Like when you can feel the energy of the earth and nature, man, it's just it can take you to a whole nother level of existence, really, because now you're tuning into forces that are bigger than you, but that are really intrinsic to human nature, really. I feel that
Yes.
way anyway.
No, I completely agree. And I love that you touched on that because, yes, and you get to use all five of your senses when you're in nature. And it really is a connection that is, like you said, otherworldly. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's really important for people to get outside, move their body, get into nature, connect with it. Because I feel like, and I'm sure you'll talk about this, especially for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, either don't have the resources, don't have the education about it, or maybe don't just have the opportunity because they're not surrounded by nature like that, and it's unfortunate. So
Yes.
let's talk a little bit more about BIPOC and what that's all about and how it came to be in your involvement.
Yeah, yeah. So I always like to introduce the term BIPOC because it's sometimes unfamiliar to people. So BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and Other People of Color, and it's a term that's fairly new, used to describe people of color in general. And in the Twin Cities, we have an affinity group founded by a woman named Asha Schaffner, who's an icon, and she founded BIPOC Outdoors in the Twin Cities, and it's an affinity group. And I'll also talk about what that means. An affinity group is a special group for a specific group of people. So sometimes affinity groups look like women events in the parks or all women triathlon groups, or sometimes it
Okay,
looks like age groups. So if you ever see like summer camps that are for ages 5 to 8, that's an affinity group, right? Because it's a specific group. And
gotcha.
so BIPOC Outdoors Twin Cities is an affinity group for all people of color, and it's a group that really pushes for folks to get outside, and it's very communal. So it's folks posting in the Facebook group like, "Hey, I'm gonna go paddling here. Who wants to join me?" Or sometimes folks will get together and organize, like me and four of my fellow really good friends, Fabi, Philson, Mia, and Grace. We got together in March and we started organizing. Well, I should say last September, we got together and started organizing a BIPOC winter retreat in the Boundary Waters up in Grand Marais, Minnesota. And that was quite an experience.
How many people did you have on this retreat?
Yeah, we had about 60 people on this retreat, which
Wow.
was insane and in the best way. And we started out planning and we're like, okay, what if we plan for around like 30 people or so? And then we had 30 people on our wait list. So we are like, okay, let's grow our capacity. We can get more guides, we can get more organizers, and we wanted to just say yes to everyone, right? Because the more the
Yeah.
merrier. And so we did it. We got we got a lot of we wrote a lot of grants and we got a lot of support from other nonprofits to get transportation for majority of folks up to the Boundary Waters from the Twin
Mhm.
Cities. We had a lot of gear donations. It was it was a dream come true, truly.
That's awesome. Can you talk about because it sounds like in doing this, you were helping to bridge what you call the adventure gap.
Yes, yes.
Can you talk more about that? What is the adventure gap?
Yeah, absolutely. So the adventure gap is a statement towards the gap that we're seeing in who is participating in nature. And historically, like a lot of things, nature has always been incredibly segregated. And so, like you touched on a little bit before, Ian. There specific, if you look at like neighborhoods or where people of color are, where they live, or the type of resources or opportunities that they have, there have
Hmm.
been so many barriers put in place to keep people of color from interacting with nature or being in the outdoors. And so, what closing the adventure gap kind of means is uh, people like me and a lot of my close friends and colleagues are working really hard to close that adventure gap by looking at these barriers and being like, okay, how can we create space for people of color to come enjoy this? What does it mean to kind of challenge these narratives or negative stereotypes? Like one of the biggest ones that I hear a lot is like Black people can't swim. And me as a Black swimmer, I've always been like, well, I love swimming. Let's talk more about that. Or how do we get more Black people or more brown people or more people of color out into water? And so uh, that's kind of what closing the adventure gap is. It's preparing it's gathering more resources and preparing more opportunities for people of color and creating more awareness around that too, because it's also generational, right? If folks of color historically haven't been in the outdoors, I think about my grandma, for example. It would be hard for me to be like, Grandma, like, let's go hiking. She's going to be like, that's that's a white person activity. And
Right.
then it's just kind of like generally generationally also unpacking that stigma, like, no, nature is for people of color too. It's, we're out here, we're doing the thing.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, it's just providing all kinds of joy and opportunity for people that look like us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Growing up in Minnesota, there weren't a lot of Black people around, right? So I grew up in white suburbia, um, and I am in white suburbia now. It's where I live in Chesterton, Indiana,
Hmm.
and my wife is white, and we have a blended family. Um, and I wonder if you can explain to our listeners and our viewers who may not understand when you say there have been so many barriers that have been put in place for people of color to be able to access and enjoy the great outdoors. Can you break that down? Because I'm thinking that people are thinking to themselves like, well, the great outdoors is right outside. Like, why? What kind of barriers are there for people of color that they can't enjoy it? So can you kind of
Yeah.
explain that for our listeners and our viewers, what you mean by that?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. So, what that can mean, it could look like proximity, so like physical location,
Hmm.
such as if you look at, I'll use the Twin Cities for an example. If you look at the lakes here, or actually that's kind of like everywhere, if you look at any sort of waterway and you look at who lives there and whose houses are along the waterways, it's
Yeah.
usually very affluent or wealthy white families or
Hmm.
white folks. And then when you look at neighborhoods where primarily people of color live, you tend to not see many parks or you tend to not see many lakes or rivers. And if you do, they're heavily polluted. And so a lot of the times it's like that. They don't, people of color have to travel a lot more to go to these places. And then on top of that, when you start kind of like unpacking slowly, they're like, okay, if people of color are traveling more distance to get to these parks, what does that look like for gas money? Or what does that look like? Do they have childcare if they, and then you want to look at like monetarily, a lot of communities of color are low income families, and so they
Right.
make less. So then it's kind of like the just over analyzing the resources of it all. But then also you have as I was talking about earlier, nature has been segregated for a really long time, and that comes with a lot of racism, right? So a lot people of color have experienced historically um, racism in the outdoors that has been inherently violent and harmful to whether it's to them or to their ancestors or folks that happen. So generational storytelling kind of like
Hmm.
dwindles and um, like as Black folks, a lot of the times you'll hear like the woods are not a safe space because that where that came from historically, right? So
Right.
and then you mentioned a great point, Ian, of being in white suburbia. People tend to go where they see themselves. And so if you, which is, I talk a lot about representation and why that's so important. So if you're in a space and you're like, people here don't really look like me, you may not want to go back all the time if you don't,
Right.
if you don't feel safe there, if you don't have people there that like your community that you're like, heck yeah, I'm really loving this place. So that could be it too. And that's a part of the reason why I'm so involved in BIPOC outdoors is because I'm like, I love this. I love how we're starting to see when you see yourself or when you see other people that look like you outside, that's going to increase your joy and your want and your pull to get in the outdoors. So does that kind of make sense? I can touch on a few more points too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just wanted to kind of get that out there to kind of explain that for our viewers and listeners that may be thinking like, yeah, I'm surrounded by outdoors all the time. I just step outside and there I
Right,
am.
like in
But
the backyard.
right, they don't
Yeah.
understand. Potentially, they might not understand that other people don't have that resource, or in some terms, that luxury, which they may
Yes.
not see as a luxury. You
Yeah,
know,
yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was a great question, and like you said too, it's unfortunate that getting outside is a privilege, and that's something in my work that I'm trying really hard to unpack because being outside and being out in nature should be a right for everyone, and it's really unfortunate and frustrating that it's not.
so and this kind of dovetails into the work that you do in terms of with the Parks and Trails ambassador for the park system, and talking about the structural challenges and the programmatic inequities across the region that you live in. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about that? What are some of those programmatic inequities that you've seen that you deal with?
Yeah, yeah. So a big one for me, water safety and aquatics and swimming is one of my biggest passions. I love the water. I've always loved the water. And when I moved to Minnesota, I was like, all right, this is the land of 10,000 lakes. I live in the Twin Cities where there's so much access to water. And I started looking at my job at swim lessons and access to those. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. There's not a lot of swim lessons offered at a reasonable price, but also B, what I notice is not a lot of family swim lessons are apparent. And I was kind of like, okay, and what I mean by that is like when we're looking at swim lessons, it's important that it's a family endeavor because if the parents are dropping off their kids to swim lessons and they also don't know how to swim, then it's like they're the ones with the resources and the car and they're not going to take, the kids to the lake necessarily if that's a place that they don't feel safe at.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
kind of like a little bit about my job is when we look at those inequities, we're like, okay, how can we start to just really kind of fill all the puzzle pieces and put that together of like addressing those barriers, right? And so aquatics is one that I talk about a lot. It could also look like trails in general, like how much lighting do we have on trails? Do we have
Okay.
benches on trails so that if elderly folks or if folks with certain physical disabilities need to or would like to sit down, they can, and so that increases the access of these trails. A lot of this will look like supporting affinity groups that are already in motion. So that could be like BIPOC Outdoors, Twin Cities, or it could be like certain youth leagues or all women events or LGBTQ plus leagues or groups. And so that's kind of the fun part about my job is I get to convene and put together and build relationships with different areas of the cities and kind of connect them all.
Very cool. What would you say? I mean, this sounds like it's a lot of fun, but I have to imagine it's probably pretty challenging. And I'm
Yes.
curious to know, as you got out of school and you were on your journey of, being a camp counselor and, being we'll call it a canoe captain, if you will, doing your canoe adventures, was there any pushback or any side eyes to you being that person that was leading those tours, or you being that camp counselor outdoors? Like, was there ever like, this person is out of place here? This is odd that an African American female is in New Hampshire doing these camping things. Did you ever
Yeah.
have any pushback, resistance, any challenges there?
That's a really good question. I found that in my organizations that I worked for, there wasn't necessarily a lot of pushback that was obvious. It would
Hmm.
be sort of it appeared to be more small. So it would be things where people would be like, "Are you sure you can do that?" Or just like a little like undermined comments. In New Hampshire, New England is incredibly white. And so there were times where I would be like at restaurants with my campers and people would mistake me for the staff of the restaurant. And I'd be like sitting with my group and I'd be like, "You came up to me with your tray?" Like that's kind of odd.
Hmm.
So there was never a lot of questioning why I should be there, and I think it's because I'm fairly loud about why I'm here, and I think sometimes addressing a lot of racism or inequities comes with uncomfortableness in general. And like we talked about earlier, that's not a state that people want to be in, right? But it's something that we have to be in when talking about these things. And
Yeah.
sometimes it could be frustrating to convince others that it's okay to be in that state of uncomfortableness. That's how we grow, especially in equity work. And so, for the most part, I was very much like, I'm here, I'm staying, um, and that's not a question to that. And I was always excited to be in the spaces that I was in, and sometimes that came with loneliness because being the only Black person or being the only person of color on a team
Hmm.
um, was hurtful in ways because I couldn't relate a lot of my experience to others, or like talking to a
Right.
lot of folks, they would be like, "Oh yeah, like my parents are rock climbers, like we're doing this constantly," and they had a lot of that experience that I was like, "Oh, this is really new to me." And
Hmm.
being new at something. Turns out, Ian, like I don't like being bad at things, and that was really humbling to find out. Especially as an outdoor guide, I was like, not only do I not like being bad at things, I don't like being bad at things and having others witness that. So I
Right.
had to learn really quickly what it was like to be clumsy in front of others and be okay with that. And so, yeah, I think that's a really great question, and it came with a lot of transition and growth as well, which is never fun or easy, but always, always rewarding. And it helped me expand my lens. And it helped me in my current job too, because now I have that personal experience of describing the uncomfortableness, and it helped my facilitation skills and my professionalism too, of being like, how do we have these conversations and what can they look like? So,
Yeah. That's that's amazing life experience that you're able to use, and with the uncomfortable situations that you've been in, you're able to pull that into conversations that you have with other people to, I guess, make their uncomfortable situation less uncomfortable. Where did you get that confidence from to be able to deal with those situations the way that you did in the first place?
yeah, that's a really good question. To be completely honest with you, I was faking it a lot of the time. Kind of like fake it till you make it. It's so real because there were times when I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I knew a lot of, especially working at camp where it was one of the first times that I was like, oh, this is the real deal. Like I'm leading these camping trips, and I would tell my team all the time, I'm like, I'm an expert at working with kids. I work really well with people. I'm a great facilitator. My hard skills, like tying knots and, putting up tents, that was something that I was still kind of working on.
Sure.
And so I really had to fake it till I made it, because that confidence, it came easy for me with a lot of things where I was like, okay, I know that I'm a great cooperator and I'm a great leader. And I was like, now how do I build that confidence with the things that I wasn't so much good at? And um I think it came with a lot of vulnerability too. So I was still
Yeah.
confident, but I realized that confidence doesn't n- I realized that confidence looks like being vulnerable. And I didn't know that for a while, where I was like, oh, I could be a leader, I could be confident and still tell people that I'm scared or that I don't know how to do things. That was new for me. And that was a really important lesson. And I still, to this day, think about that a lot in my professional work, but also just in life in general. And so um, I
That's awesome.
learned, yeah,
That's
yeah.
something that I've learned, that has been called, at least I've heard it called, the white belt mentality. So like when you are
Ooh,
in martial arts and you're a beginner and you're learning everything to earn your white belt, and you know that the successful people in life go through life with that white belt mentality, not thinking that they know everything and always willing to learn, and having that learner's mind, and being able to be humble and realizing that they don't know everything, and that, to be truthful, you're going to suck at some things sometimes, right? And
yes.
that's just the way it is. But if you're paying attention, you learn, and you're from that learning, you're able to grow. And I mean that is true in every area of life. So I mean that is something that it sounds like you were able to embody quickly, and use to your advantage, and be humble in front of others and be able to make mistakes, which is hallmarks of a great leader. So that's That's awesome.
Thank you. And I'd never heard of that term before, but I love that because it's so true. I find that too, working with kids, you learn that really quickly because they're so quick to be like, I had never done this before. And I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And it's nice to be like, you know what, me either, but we'll figure this out. Oh,
yeah,
that's incredible.
yeah. It is so refreshing at times to work with kids because they're so honest. Like
Yes.
they're just out there. Like they're just gonna say what they say. Sometimes they'll say how they feel, and they don't have the I guess the disadvantage of being an adult because we become so guarded with our actions and our thoughts because we're so worried about what others think
Hmm.
about us. But kids are just like, this is me, and that's all I know how to be. So take it for what it is.
Yes, yes.
It's just so refreshing with kids because if we could keep that all throughout life, I think life would be so much more enjoyable.
I agree. I really agree. I think that that's a part of reparenting ourselves too, right? Is like I love talking about inner child work and just kind of like listening to your inner child and pulling your inner child back out because I love that. I think you're so right. And if we took so many things that kids do and learn and say and build those into our adult lives, oh, we would be the best versions of ourselves,
Yeah,
hands down.
absolutely. I love that term, reparenting. I haven't heard that before. Reparenting
Yeah,
ourselves.
it's an interesting term, and I think about it a lot in the way that I navigate who I am and who I'm becoming, because there are so many, just like what I talked about earlier, the whole I don't like the idea of being mediocre at something, especially if I'm new to it. I had to
Yeah,
sit down with my inner child and be like, wait a minute. Validating those feelings, but also who told you that, or like where did those thoughts come from, and just kind of working through that and unpacking that.
that is awesome. Well, Janessa, this has been an awesome conversation. I feel like we could talk for hours about the
Yes.
outdoors and about how to be successful in uncomfortable situations and how to reparent ourselves. But I want to give you an opportunity to let our viewers and our listeners know where they can find out more information about BIPOC Outdoors.
Yeah, absolutely. So BIPAC Outdoors is a closed Facebook group. There is a little bit of information on it on Asha Schaffner's website, which I will link to you, Ian. If this is something that you're interested in starting where you live, I recommend forming a Facebook group and watching it kind of flourish and grow. And that's how the one here started. And um, I'm racking my brain right now of other resources that I can share, and
And
it's going blank.
just to be clear, if you are not Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, you can still support a BIPOC Outdoors community, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me of that,
Hmm.
Ian. And if that's not necessarily something that you can do monetarily, I always say time is money, and grant writing takes a lot of work and a lot of time. So if you have interest in doing something like that, that's a huge help. Sometimes it can also look like going through your closet and recognizing that you have some gear or some sort of activity that you are no longer interested in. So donating some gear is always a huge help, and helping find resources or spaces, or being an ally in the outdoors just looks like being someone who is out there and willing to support. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it has been a joy having you on the show. I love your energy. I feel like I can feel it through the screen.
Thank
And I have to
you.
imagine that anybody that you are around who are you are leading or helping has to be just ecstatic about having you in their presence because you exude like just positivity, and I love that
Thank you so much, Ian. That means the
for
world to
sure,
me. Thank you for
for
having
sure.
me on. This is incredible.
Yeah, this has been great. If you were to leave, let's say you're talking to one of your kids at camp and you wanted to leave them with some life wisdom, what pearl of wisdom would you leave them with? Like maybe a
Mm,
motto or a credo that you use, or maybe a quote that you love, or a phrase, or something like that.
that is such a good question,
I
Ian.
know,
I
putting you on
think
the spot, putting you on the spot.
I think I'm going to go with what I went a little bit on the same route of what I talked about earlier of Do what scares you because you'll be so surprised with the hallway of doors that will open up to you if you choose to go that route. Leaning into discomfort is really difficult, but it's incredibly rewarding. Have trust in yourself, have faith in yourself, fake it till you make it if you have to. Confidence will come along the road. And this is going to sound corny, but truly don't be afraid to shine. That's been my motto. Getting rid of the fear of being seen has been a challenge this year, but it's something we're pushing through. So let people see you, let people hold you.
That's awesome. Oh, I love that one. Let people see you. Let people hold you. Man,
They're
all
going to
right.
catch you.
Janessa, you are such a light. Thank you so much for being on the show. We appreciate it. And I appreciate all of our listeners and our viewers for checking out this episode. Make sure that you give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the show if you like what you heard today. And make sure you're checking us out on all of our socials. And we will see you next time. But until then, stay positive, stay persistent, and remember, mindset is everything. We'll see you next time.